The drive to my parents' house in Oakville should take 40 minutes from my apartment in Toronto. On the Thanksgiving long weekend, bumper to bumper on the QEW with a box of butter tarts on the passenger seat, it took me almost 2 hours. That was fine. I had learned to build extra time into every visit home, the same way you learn to wear an extra layer in October, because you know the cold is coming and there's nothing you can do except be prepared for it. The house was completely dark when I pulled into the driveway. No porch light, no warm glow from the living room windows. My parents loved Thanksgiving. My mother spent every October hosting an elaborate dinner for their friends, serving wine from her carefully curated cellar and talking loudly about everything my brother had accomplished that year. There should have been cars in the driveway. Music drifting out from the kitchen. The smell of roasting turkey reaching me before I even got the door open. Instead, there was just the crunch of gravel under my tires, the faint creak of the side gate swinging in the October wind and silence. I told myself the furnace might be acting up. I told myself maybe they'd stepped out for more groceries. I told myself a lot of things while I was unlocking the front door and stepping into a house that was nearly as cold inside as the air I'd left behind. Hello, my voice echoed off the hardwood floors. Mom, Dad? Nothing. I left my bag by the stairs and walked toward the kitchen. The granite countertops were spotless. The good china was locked in the hutch. There was no turkey in the oven, no cutting boards scattered with vegetable ends, no evidence that a single meal had been prepared that day. On the kitchen island, perfectly centered like it had been placed there by someone who wanted to make sure it would not be missed, was a note written on my mother's cream-colored stationery. I recognized her handwriting before I even picked it up. Your father surprised your brother with a last-minute trip to Cuba. He's been stretched thin with the Lakeshore project and he really needed a break. We know you don't have much on your plate right now, so we've made arrangements for you to stay and look after Gran. Her medications are in the bathroom cabinet. The label has the dosage. Try not to bother her too much. She has good days and bad ones. The house will be fine. Don't touch the thermostat. Have a good weekend. I read it twice. Then I set it back down on the cold granite, very carefully, because I didn't trust what I might do with it in my hands. Cuba. They had flown my brother to Cuba for Thanksgiving because he had been stretched thin. My brother, who was 31 years old. My brother, who had been handed the title of vice president at my father's property development company 3 years ago. Despite having graduated at the bottom of his class, from a business program he coasted through on my parents' money. My brother, who spent the majority of his working hours at client lunches he expensed back to the company, and golf afternoons he called relationship building. I, on the other hand, was a licensed CPA with a specialty in forensic accounting. I had put myself through school on OSIF and part-time work at a bookkeeping office on King Street. I had passed all 3 levels of the CFE on my first attempt. I had built a small but respected practice identifying financial fraud for insurance companies, law firms, and private clients, work my father had referred to at last year's Thanksgiving dinner in front of 12 extended family members as glorified snoop work. He had actually used those words. He had smiled while he said them, and my brother had laughed, and I had gripped the stem of my wine glass so hard, I was surprised it didn't crack. Before I tell you what happened next, I want to know where you're watching from. Drop your city in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe to Furry Revenge, especially if you've ever had your hard work written off by the people who should have been proud of you. I found the medication in the upstairs bathroom, exactly where the note said it would be. 2 amber bottles with my grandmother's name printed in black type, one for cognition, one for blood pressure. I shook the smaller one and heard the familiar rattle. Then I went to find her. My grandmother was 76 years old and had been living in the downstairs guest room since the spring, when my parents had convinced her it was safer than her own house. They had told everyone she was declining. They talked about her memory lapses at the dinner table, sighed heavily when she repeated a question, and spent a considerable amount of time explaining to anyone who would listen how difficult it was to care for someone in her condition. My mother had taken over her power of attorney in April. My father had quietly assumed control of her personal accounts to reduce her stress, as he put it. What I had seen on my occasional visits was a woman who seemed confused and withdrawn, She would sometimes lose track of what she was saying mid-sentence. She would stare out the window for long stretches. Once she had called me by the wrong name and I had sat with her for 20 minutes afterward, holding her hand, telling her it was fine. That was the woman I expected to find. The living room was dim, the curtains were mostly closed, and the floor lamp in the corner had been switched off. I could make out the shape of the wingback chair near the window, facing away from the door. On the floor beside it, alert and perfectly still, sat Maple, my grandmother's golden retriever, 9 years old and going gray around the muzzle. Maple watched me come through the doorway with calm, intelligent eyes. She didn't bark, she didn't scramble up to greet me the way she usually did when I visited. She just sat there, positioned at my grandmother's feet like she was keeping watch. I noticed that. I crossed the room slowly, the medication bottle in my hand. I came around the side of the chair, preparing my voice for a soft greeting, preparing myself for the vacant look I had come to dread. My grandmother was not vacant. She was sitting with her spine straight, her hands folded in her lap, and her eyes fixed on me with an expression of sharp, clear attention that I had not seen on her face in nearly a year. There was no fog in it, no confusion, no soft wandering focus that would slide off my face and settle somewhere across the room. Her gaze was steady and exact and completely unmistakably present. "Are they gone?" she asked. Her voice was quiet and even, not a confused murmur, a direct question asked by someone who already had a very good idea of the answer. The medication bottle slipped from my fingers. It hit the floor and Maple flinched, but my grandmother didn't move. "Gran," I said, my voice came out wrong, too thin. "You know who I am." "I have always known who you are," she said. She reached down and scratched behind Maple's ear, and Maple leaned into her hand. "I know who you are. I know what day it is. I know your father and your brother left for Varadero this morning on a 6 o'clock flight, and I know your mother went with them." I stared at her. She looked back at me without apology. "I owe you an explanation, sit down." Her name was, well, I called her Gran, and that was what she had always been to me. But the woman who sat in that wingback chair and told me the truth about the last 8 months was not the diminished, confused woman my parents had described at every family dinner since spring. She was precise and deliberate, and underneath the quiet furious. "I started noticing discrepancies in my bank statements since in January," she said. "Small things at first. Withdrawals I couldn't account for. A transfer I didn't remember authorizing. When I asked your father about it, he told me I was misremembering. He said I had approved everything. He looked at me with such patience, such careful concern, like I was a child who didn't understand what she was saying." She paused. "That look told me everything I needed to know." She had made a decision in February. She had begun performing confusion, repeating questions she already knew the answers to, letting her sentences trail off. Accepting, with apparent helplessness, the power of attorney her son pressed on her in March. Watching, from behind the performance, exactly what her family did when they believed she could no longer protect herself. "I watched your brother begin signing documents he had no right to sign," she said. "I watched your father drain what he thought were my accessible accounts and tell me the money had been moved somewhere safer. I watched your mother plan this Cuba trip on funds from a line of credit she had no legal authority to open." She looked at her hands. "And I watched how they spoke to you, at Easter, at your birthday in August. I watched your father wave away every word you said like it was smoke." I felt the back of my throat tighten. "I needed someone I could trust," she said. "Someone who couldn't be bought and who had the specific skills to understand what they had actually done." I waited until they left the country. She reached under the cushion of the wingback chair and produced a small USB drive. I kept copies of everything on this. Every statement, every transfer record, every document they had me sign since March. I have been building this file since January. She held it out to me. I looked at it sitting in her palm, then I looked up at her face. "I know what your father calls your work," she said. "I know what he said at Thanksgiving last year, and I know what he said in August, and I know what your brother says when he thinks you can't hear him. None of it is true. I need a forensic accountant, and the best one I know is sitting in front of me right now." I took the USB drive. I used my laptop. Gran sat beside me at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she made herself, completely steadily, without any difficulty at all, while I opened the files on the drive and started reading. The scope of it took a few minutes to land. When it did, it landed like something physical. My father and brother had incorporated 3 numbered companies in Ontario over the past 14 months. 2 were registered in my grandmother's name without her knowledge, using the power of attorney. 1 was registered under my brother's name but listed my grandmother's residential property in Burlington as a corporate asset. All 3 were shells. There were no employees, no business activity, no revenue. They existed entirely to receive and launder transfers. Using the power of attorney, my father had opened a HELOC against my grandmother's Burlington home. The credit limit was $380,000. It had been fully drawn down by June. Gran, I said, did you know about a home equity line of credit on your Burlington property? She wrapped both hands around her mug. I know about it now. The funds went through one of the numbered companies and then into a joint account I can see referenced here, but don't have full statements for yet. I kept scrolling. There's also a second HELOC. This one is attached to the Muskoka cottage. She was quiet for a moment. Your grandfather built that cottage. I know. I kept my voice even, the way I do in professional settings when the numbers are telling me something I need to stay calm enough to act on. The draw on the cottage HELOC was $210,000. Combined with the Burlington draw, they accessed nearly $600,000 in your equity and moved it through the shell structure. Some of it looks like it covered the corporate credit card for the Lakeshore Development Project, meaning your money funded a project your father is billing clients for. The rest went to personal expenses. I found the Varadero flights in a corporate Amex statement. I found a furniture invoice for my brother's condo in Etobicoke. I found a charge from a jeweler on Bloor Street that corresponded almost exactly to the bracelet my mother had worn to Easter dinner and made a point of displaying throughout the meal. I pushed back from the table and looked at the ceiling for a second. Then my phone rang. It was a Cuban number. My brother's voice came through the speaker, bright and careless, the way it always did when he wanted something he considered minor. Hey, listen, I need you to do something for me. I looked at my grandmother. She gave me a small nod. What do you need? I said. There's a transfer I need to run through Gran's RBC account, about $20,000. Just log into the portal and authorize it to the 4471 company account. It needs to clear by Tuesday. What's the transfer for? A brief pause. The kind that means the question was not expected to be asked. It's a business expense, materials for the Lakeshore site. It needs to come from that account for tax purposes. It's not a big deal. I'm not doing that, I said. The warmth went out of his voice immediately. Sorry? I'm not authorizing a transfer from her account. She didn't instruct me to. You don't have the authority to instruct me to, and a $20,000 materials expense doesn't need to route through the personal account of a 76-year-old woman for tax purposes. That's not how it works. He made a sound that was half laugh, half contempt. You know what your problem is? You've spent your whole career going through other people's dirty laundry and you think that makes you an expert in actual business. You're a snoop with a CPA designation. You're not in the room where real decisions get made. And you never will be, because Dad figured out a long time ago that you're not the kind of person who can be trusted with real responsibility. I let him finish. You're welcome to try a different approach, I said, but I'm not logging into her accounts. There was a silence. Then, when we get back, I'm going to have a very direct conversation with Dad about your access to this family. You've always been difficult and I've always covered for you, but I'm done. Enjoy your weekend playing nurse. He hung up. My grandmother had heard everything. She looked at her tea. He has always spoken to you like that? More or less. I'm sorry, she said. I should have said something sooner. We had gone back to the files and were working through the numbered company registrations when Gran's email pinged on the screen. She had given me full access to her accounts. The sender was a real estate brokerage I didn't recognize. The subject line was offer confirmation, Muskoka property. I opened it. My father had listed the Muskoka cottage with a brokerage in Bracebridge 3 weeks earlier, using a notarized power of attorney document. An offer had come in. A corporation, No individual name, just a numbered company with a registered address in the Cayman Islands, had offered $900,000 firm, no conditions, rapid closing. The closing date was the coming Wednesday, 4 days away. The deposit had already been received by the brokerage and trust. I read the email twice and felt the ground shift under me. Muskoka. My grandfather had built that cottage with his own hands in 1979. My grandmother had spent 40 summers there. The dock, the wood stove, the particular smell of the screened-in porch in the evening. Those were the things she talked about when she talked about being happy. And my father had quietly listed it 3 weeks ago, without a word to anyone, and was now in Cuba waiting for the transaction to close while she sat in his cold house, with a handful of pills she had been hiding under her tongue for 8 months. Gran, I said. I turned the laptop toward her. She read the email. Her expression didn't crumble, it just went still and very hard. He cannot sell that cottage, she said quietly. My name is the only name on that deed. He used the power of attorney, I said. Same as the HELOCs, the brokerage accepted it in good faith. She looked at me. Can we stop it? 4 days, no less than 4 days. The closing was Wednesday, today was Sunday. The brokerage would process paperwork Monday morning. We had at most until Monday morning to get a court order in place. I need to call Vaughn, I said. Gran's estate lawyer was a man named Vaughn, and he had been handling her affairs for over 20 years. She had given me his number months ago, she said, had put it in my phone contacts without explaining why. I had thought it was just in case of a health emergency. I called him at 9 o'clock on a Sunday night of the Thanksgiving long weekend. He picked up on the third ring. I explained everything in about 4 minutes, the shell companies, the HELOCs, the power of attorney, the cottage offer, the Wednesday closing. He asked me 2 questions. Did I have documented proof that the POA was used without my grandmother's informed consent? And was my grandmother currently lucid and able to give a sworn statement? Yes to both, I said. Send me everything on that drive tonight, he said. I'm filing for an emergency injunction first thing tomorrow to force the real estate transaction. I'll also contact the Law Society. The notary who witnessed that POA document has some questions to answer, and I want your grandmother to give a sworn video statement tonight, while you're there, before anything changes. We worked until past midnight. Gran gave her statement clearly and completely, sitting at the kitchen table with Maple at her feet, speaking directly into my laptop camera without a single hesitation or repetition. She described every instance of coercion, every document she had not willingly signed, every transfer she had not authorized. She described the months of performance, the careful confusion, the strategic silence, and why she had maintained it. She was precise and thorough and utterly composed. When it was done, she reached over and closed the laptop. She looked tired, not confused, just tired, the way any 76-year-old woman would be after giving a detailed account of being systematically robbed by her family. Thank you, she said, for not leaving. I wouldn't have left. I know, that's why I waited for you. By Monday afternoon, Vaughn had filed the emergency injunction and reached a justice of the Ontario Superior Court, who agreed to review the application by noon. At 2:14 in the afternoon, the injunction was granted. The Muskoka cottage sale was frozen. The brokerage was ordered to return the deposit pending a full investigation. The notarized power of attorney was flagged as potentially fraudulent and referred to the Law Society and the RCMP Financial Crime Unit. That afternoon, I hired a locksmith and had every exterior lock on the house changed. I set up new codes on the keypad. I canceled the corporate credit cards linked to the numbered companies registered in my grandmother's name. I worked with Vaughn to have the original power of attorney formally revoked and replaced with a new one, naming me as authorized agent, prepared properly with her full legal consent and 2 independent witnesses present. We did not tell my father and brother any of this. We let them stay in Cuba. They came back on Thursday morning, all 3 of them, tanned and relaxed, rolling luggage out of an Uber in the driveway. I watched from the living room window. Gran sat in her chair behind me. Maple settled across her feet, a cup of tea in her hand. My father reached the front door first. He put his key in the lock and turned it, nothing. He tried again, harder, then held the key up to inspect it like the problem was metallurgical. My brother took over, the way he always did when he decided someone else was doing something wrong. He jammed his own key in, rattled it, then noticed the new keypad mounted above the handle and stared at it for a long moment. My mother stood on the porch with her arms crossed, her sunglasses still on, demanding to know what had happened to the lock. I opened the door. They looked at me like I had appeared out of nowhere. "There's been a security upgrade," I said. "For the property, I'd suggest we talk before you try to come inside." My father took a step toward the door. "This is my house, get out of the way." "It is your house," I said. "For now. The same way the Muskoka cottage was Gran's cottage, until you tried to sell it to a Cayman Islands numbered company for a below-market cash sale while you were on vacation." His face changed, not quickly, in pieces as the color didn't drain so much as shift, settling into something grayish and controlled. The look of a man who has just realized the timeline he was operating on has changed without his knowledge. My brother was less controlled. "What did you just say?" I said Gran's estate lawyer filed a successful injunction on Monday to freeze the cottage sale. I also said the RCMP Financial Crime Unit has received the numbered company documentation, the HELOC records, the forged power of attorney, and Gran's sworn statement. I paused. "She's inside, by the way." "She has been waiting." My brother turned to our father. "I thought you said she wouldn't." "Stop talking," my father said. My mother had gone very still behind her sunglasses. My brother took his phone out of his jacket pocket. His hands, I noticed, were not entirely steady. "I'm calling the police," he said. "You changed the locks on a private residence. You've been manipulating a woman with a cognitive condition. I'm having you removed." "Call them," I said. He did. He told the dispatcher his elderly grandmother was being held against her will by a family member who had changed the locks on a residential property without consent. He sounded very credible. He had always been good at sounding credible. The officers arrived in about 12 minutes, 2 cruisers from the Halton Regional Police, and behind them a third vehicle, unmarked, with 2 plainclothes officers from the Financial Crimes Unit. My brother went to meet the uniformed officers with his arms open and his most cooperative expression in place. He began explaining the situation. He said I was unstable. He said I had always had a difficult relationship with reality. He said his grandmother needed to be protected from me. The uniformed officers listened. One of them was writing things down. Then the plainclothes officers walked past my brother like he wasn't there, and came directly to the door and introduced themselves to me. My brother stopped talking. One of the financial crimes officers held up a folder. "We're here to speak with." And here she said my father's name and my brother's name in sequence. She looked past me into the living room. "Is the homeowner present?" "She's inside," I said. "She's been expecting you." My grandmother came to the door on her own. She stood in the frame without leaning on anything, Maple at her heel, and looked at her son on the porch with an expression so flat and so final that he actually took a step backward. "Mum," he said. His voice had changed completely. The smoothness was gone. "Mum, this is a misunderstanding. Whatever she's told you." "I told them," my grandmother said. "I have been speaking with Vaughn since Monday. I gave my sworn statement Sunday night. The misunderstanding, if there is one, is yours." My brother grabbed our father's arm. "We need to go, right now. We sort this out through lawyers. We don't have to stand here and—" The financial crimes officer spoke calmly. "We're going to ask you both to come with us to answer some questions regarding a series of financial transactions. You're not under arrest at this time, but I would strongly advise you not to leave." At this time, my father heard those 3 words the same way I heard them. He closed his eyes for 1 second, then he nodded and picked up his carry-on and walked toward the unmarked car. My brother did not go quietly. He argued on the porch for 6 minutes, his voice going from firm to loud to something very close to pleading, while our mother stood completely motionless with her arms around her own body like she was holding herself together. He said there had been a misunderstanding about the power of attorney documentation. He said all the transfers had been for legitimate business purposes. He said my grandmother had approved everything when she was in a clearer state. He said a lot of things, and none of them were the right things to say in front of 2 financial crimes investigators who were already in possession of the full USB drive contents and Vaughn's complete injunction file. When they finally put him in the car, he looked at me through the window with an expression I don't have a word for. Not rage, exactly. something closer to disbelief that the world had arranged itself this way, that I, specifically, had been the one left behind in that house. My mother waited until the cars were gone. She took her sunglasses off. Her eyes were red, and her tan looked wrong in the gray October light, too bright for the situation she was standing in. I didn't know about the cottage, she said. You knew about the HELOCs, I said. You wore the bracelet to Easter dinner. She didn't answer. Vaughn's office will be in touch about the civil recovery process, I said. You're welcome to get independent legal advice. I went back inside and closed the door. The RCMP charge documents came 6 weeks later. My father was charged with fraud over $5,000, breach of fiduciary duty, and forgery of a legal document. My brother was charged with fraud over $5,000 and uttering forged documents. The notary who had witnessed the original power of attorney lost his commission after the Law Society investigation, confirmed he had signed documents without properly verifying my grandmother's capacity or free consent. The Bay Street firm that had handled my father's commercial work for years declined to take the criminal defense case once they reviewed the evidentiary file. The forensic metadata on the POA documents showed creation timestamps from devices registered to my father and brother. The HELOC applications had been submitted using account credentials my grandmother's bank confirmed had never been accessed from her own devices. The numbered company incorporation records showed filing dates that did not align with the timelines my father had given Vaughn in his initial response letter. It was not a complicated case. That was the thing my brother had never understood about forensic accounting. You don't need something complicated when the money trail is clear. The truth doesn't require elaborate construction. It's just there, in the numbers, waiting for someone patient enough to read it. They both took plea deals 8 months later. My father received a 2-year conditional sentence and was barred from serving as a director of any corporation in Canada for 10 years. My brother received an 18-month conditional sentence and a full restitution order. My mother had not been criminally charged. Her role had been passive rather than active, but the civil recovery process attached a judgment to the joint assets she held with my father. The jewelry she had acquired during the preceding 14 months was inventoried as part of the asset recovery. She sold the Oakville house and moved into an apartment in Burlington. She wrote me 3 letters in the year that followed. I didn't write back. The Muskoka cottage stayed in my grandmother's name. She transferred it into a properly structured family trust in the spring, with Vaughn overseeing every document and 2 independent witnesses present at every signing. The Burlington property remained hers. The shell companies were dissolved. The HELOCs were restructured against the recoverable assets, and the funds that could be traced were returned. Gran and I went up to Muskoka that June, just the 2 of us. We took Maple. The dog bolted straight for the dock the moment I opened the car door, the way she always had since she was a puppy, and my grandmother laughed, a real laugh, full and unguarded, watching her skid on the weathered boards and nearly go in. We sat on the screened porch that evening while the light went long and gold across the water. Gran had a glass of wine. I had tea. Maple was asleep across the doorstep, twitching in her dreams, and the pines on the far shore were perfectly still. Your grandfather would have liked you, Gran said. I've always thought so. He liked people who paid attention. I looked out at the water. I spent a long time trying to be the kind of person my father would approve of, I said. I'm not sure when I stopped exactly. Maybe it was Sunday night, sitting at that kitchen table with your USB drive. Approval from the wrong source was never worth having, she said. I should have told your father that 40 years ago. I let him believe his opinion of people determined their value. I'm sorry it landed on you the way it did. It didn't, I said, not in the end. She touched my hand once briefly, and we sat there until the light left the sky and Maple woke up and decided she needed her dinner. The greatest thing I took from that Thanksgiving weekend is something I had technically known for years but had never fully believed. The people who dismiss your work are usually the people who need it most. My father called forensic accounting glorified snoop work at a dinner table in front of 12 people. He was right that I was looking through other people's records. He just never imagined those records would be his. The skills he spent years dismissing were exactly the ones that unraveled everything he had built on someone else's trust. If you've ever had your efforts minimized by the people who were supposed to be in your corner, I would love to hear your story in the comments. Hit that like button, subscribe to Furry Revenge, and know that paying close attention to the numbers, to the people who actually deserve it, to the quiet ones who are watching and waiting for the right moment, is never wasted. It always matters in the end.